Hello, my friends. So great to see you. Hey, I'm out on this beautiful, cool morning, ready to continue our story about David. All right, are you enjoying learning about him? Yeah. All right, let's do a really quick review. Are you ready? All right, so we started with God telling Samuel, go to the city of Bethlehem, go to the house of Jesse, and one of his sons, I want you to anoint him to be the new king. And so there goes Samuel. He goes to Jesse, and Jesse says, well, of course, it must be my oldest son. No. The next one? No. He went down through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 sons. And none of them. He said, Jesse, don't you have another son? And he said, well, I have David, my youngest, but he's out in the field with his sheep. And Samuel said, Jesse, go get David. He brought David in, and David knelt down in front of everyone in the city of Bethlehem. And Samuel poured the oil over his head and said, you will be Israel's next king. God says you will be the next king, David. But did David become king right away? No, he had some growing to do still, didn't he? And so he went back out to the field with his sheep, and he learned a lot out there. He learned to care for sheep as he was going to care for people as a king, right? He learned to be a strong warrior. Do you remember talking about when the lion and the bear came after the sheep and David was able to fight him off, right? Yeah. All right, that was story number 1. Story number 2, it's about that big guy. All right, you know who I'm talking about. Who is it? Goliath, right? So the Israelites were at war with the Philistines. And David, he was out with the sheep still, but his brothers went to fight with the Israelites. And so one day Jesse said, David, take this bread and this cheese and go out and give that to your brothers who are out fighting. And so he went. And while he was there, Goliath stepped out. Who will fight me? Right? Everyone else cowered back, but not David. David said, I could fight him because I come with the power of the living God. No heathen Philistine can come against the power of God. And so the soldiers took him over to Saul, who was king, right? And he gave him his armor and his sword. And he said, okay, take this. This is how you can protect yourself. And David's like, no. That's not what I need. I just need the power of God. So out he goes. He stops by that little babbling brook and picks up those 5 little stones, do you remember? And with this slingshot, boom, he takes down Goliath. So this is where our story starts today. All right? And so Saul, after hearing about David taking down Goliath, he said, bring him to the palace. And that's where we start. And our story today is about 2 friends. That's why I have 2 drums. I thought this will remind you that our story is not about Saul. It's about the friendship of 2 people. And the friendship is between David and Saul's oldest son, Jonathan. All right. So Jonathan, they were all living in the palace together, and Jonathan was Saul's oldest son. And so if he was the oldest son, what would that make him? Yeah, you got it. He is a prince. And so here's David, being raised as a shepherd, living in a palace. His best friend is a prince. Now, David and Jonathan became such good friends. They were like brothers. They grew up together, all right? They grew up from being young men to growing into their manhood as friends, as best friends. And one day, Jonathan said, David, you're such a good friend. I want to give you something. And he gave David one of his princely robes. All right, so think about David being raised wearing probably very casual tunics out with the sheep to wearing this princely robe. And he even gave him another thing. He said, I want you to take this princely sword. Things that David were not used to, but he was now carrying himself like a prince, wasn't he? He was being raised in the palace, and he was there growing. He was growing as a soldier, too. And so the Israelites and the Philistines were still fighting. There was still more war happening. And Saul, when he would go out to war, he would take David because he knew he was such a great fighter. And so they would go out together, and something started happening. They would come back to the town, right? And the people would see Saul, and they would say, okay, good job, Saul. And they would see David, and they would start shouting, and the women would start dancing, and they were like, David is the best warrior. And they would say, Saul has slain the thousands, but David has slain the tens of thousands. And so Saul started noticing that the people liked David so much more than they liked him. He became jealous. All right. Does anything ever good come out of when people become jealous? No. When you're jealous, do things work out well for you? No, me either. All right, we don't need to be jealous. But Saul, remember, his heart was not always for God. And he became jealous. And he became more jealous. So much so that one day, here's David just playing the harp. And Saul starts throwing a spear, and he lunges to the side, and it hits the wall. It happened time after time. He would try to kill David. This was not a good time for him. So finally, Saul started thinking, well, I'm not killing him by throwing a spear at him. I'm going to come up with another way to kill him. So he thought, I'm going to send him out with an army, and I'm going to send him out to war against the biggest, baddest Philistines, and they will kill him. I will send him out, and he will die in war, and then the people won't hate me for it. And so he sends him out, and he says, here's my promise to you, David. If you'll go out and you'll fight this group, then when you come back, I will let you marry my daughter. And David thought that was a great idea because David loved his daughter, and his daughter loved David. And so he went out, but guess what? He didn't die. He didn't die. And so he got back, and the people rejoiced, and they got to marry. David married Saul's daughter. All right. So Saul just continued to be angry and continued to be mean. And Jonathan would hear about this. So Jonathan said, look, I need to protect you. That's what a good friend does, right? He said, we've been friends for so long. He said, I want you to go and hide away. And we're fast forwarding pretty fast here, guys. But hide away, and I'm going to go talk to my father. At one time, Saul even asked Jonathan and his servants to kill David. And Jonathan's like, Father, why? David has been so good to you. Do you remember when he killed Goliath? Do you remember how he's fought for your army and he's beat and he's won and he's done such good things for you? Why do you hate him so much? But Saul's jealousy became worse and worse and worse. And so finally they're having this big feast, and all the people are around, and he goes before Saul and he says, this is Jonathan, and he says, Saul says, why is David not here? And he said, well, I sent him away. And Saul became so angry because Saul wanted David dead, right? And Jonathan sent him away. He became so angry that he threw his spear at his own son. He threw his spear at Jonathan. So Jonathan went back where David was hiding, and he said, you have to run away. He's like, my father is not going to let you live. And so David and Jonathan, two best friends, had to say goodbye to each other. And as they hugged, they made a promise. They said, please, whichever one of us lives longer, will you take care of our families? And that's what they did. Jonathan knew that David would one day be king. Now, Jonathan, he was a prince. He should have been king, right? But he knew that God had anointed David to be king. So he said, will you take care of my family? And as we go through our study, we're going to learn how David does take care of Jonathan's family. He kept his promise. They were two good friends. Even to the end of where their friendship had to end, they kept and they were faithful to each other even once they didn't see each other anymore. All right? So that's what our lesson today is about. It's about friendship. Do you guys have a close friend? Do you have a friend that's like a brother? Maybe your brother or your sister is your best friend. Is that true? Sometimes the older you get, the more you find out that can be true. Yeah. And so I asked the class, and I'm asking you guys, who is your best friend? Who is somebody that you're so close to? And what does it mean to be a best friend? What are qualities of a good friend? Can you trust your best friend? Right? Does your best friend care for you? Jonathan, he was supposed to be king. He was supposed to be the next king. He didn't care. He knew David was going to be the king. Jonathan had to stand up against his own father, who was the king, and say, no, I'm not going to kill David. David is my best friend. I'm going to care for David. Jonathan had to hide David away so that Saul couldn't kill him. He had to come up against his father and his king. And Jonathan, his life was almost taken because he was standing up for David. He was a faithful friend to David. All right? And David was faithful to Jonathan. And as you see as we go on to our stories, how he cared for his family all the way to the end. I hope you guys have a friend like that. Think about who your friends are. Think about how you are as a friend to your friends. Are you faithful to your friends? Do you care for them? Do you treat them and love them like a brother or a sister? I hope you guys do. The great thing is, from the beginning of the story, who gave Jonathan and David to be friends to each other? That was God, right? Right. And God will give you a great friend. Probably many great friends. Look out today. See who God is putting in your path. Are you being a great friend to your close friends? Are they being good friends to you? Build those friendships, but build them based on what you know about God. Ask God to bring a good friend into your life. Ask him to bring someone who you could trust, who could care for you, and you'll be faithful to, Lord. I just ask that you bring good friends to my friends. That's you. And he'll do it because he loves you so much. And I love you too. I hope you guys have a great week. We'll study more about David coming up soon, very next week. And I hope you guys just have a beautiful week. Love you. See you soon.